So one day I got a message on my Facebook inbox, and the message read, "Hi Dereck, just read your account on reading widely. That's a great challenge. Glad you won the battle. But hombre," which means but man, how do you balance reading all with family life? Your wife and kids need your time, I suppose. I find it difficult to even read preparing for my lesson the following day. My kids are all over me, let alone my wife. How do you do it? Give me a piece of advice. Thought it was best inboxing you rather than comment on your post. Thanks. And then he wrote his name there. Okay, so that's a great question, and it was, and as expected, the excuse is valid, and it's valid for all of us. We always complain that there is not enough time, and for sure there is not enough time, but you can always make time. For example, your kids should be in bed by a certain time, and once they're in bed, then there's some work you can do, but there are other ways to get around reading. It has become so much easier to access reading material because it doesn't only exist in print form anymore. There are many other ways in which we can access books. So it's exactly what I thought before I took the challenge to read more. I've always read something. Okay, Dennis Waitley's Empires of the Mind was a good read about it 2 decades ago when I read it, but it took me ages to finish it. But when I did finish it, I felt really good about it. I never got to finish Plato's Republic, but I do have the audiobook now, and I think I'm going to try and finish it. I struggled with Godel Escherbach and Eternal Golden Braid. It was a gift from a friend. Thanks, Terry. Okay, so now we have Apple's iBooks. They rekindled my passion for the written word and birthed a new passion for the spoken word. Half the books I have read I've consumed through audiobooks, so just listening while I'm driving. So instead of listening to music, which I used to do quite a lot, okay, whilst I'm driving, I prefer to listen to audiobooks. If I don't have a new audiobook, I listen to podcasts. But with time, and I'll talk about this at the end, with time, I'm doing less reading, and I'll tell you what I'm doing instead. So as I drive, I used to listen to a lot of music, but now I listen to great books, and even my children are listening along sometimes, and they're asking me questions. And it's great to have a mini book club event like this one. So I've also realized my wife is listening while I'm also listening. We do still have conversation, but it's playing in the background just like we used to play music. So right now, well, this was a couple of years ago when I wrote this. So at that time, I was listening to Steve Jobs, the exclusive biography by Walter Isaacson. But I've read a lot more books after that, most of them through audiobooks. And it's great. It expands my horizons and it widens my worldview, and it helps me to bring a different angle to the debate. My audiobooks on big data have transformed the way I see big companies like Amazon, Google, and Apple. Developing countries can learn a thing or two by just reading those books. How we can come up with great companies. So I've consumed content mainly through ebooks, audiobooks, podcasts, YouTube, radio, documentaries, speed readings, and blogs. And I'm still working on my way with speed reading, and will dedicate an article on that. Okay, so I was writing that about 2 years ago. I think a reading culture is good for developing world because it turns mourners and those who always blame someone else into problem solvers. So I would say have a reading to you. So it's important that we read because it widens our vocabulary, and it widens. It gives us ideas, or it helps us with coming up with innovative ideas. Because when we read books, we begin to think about our own problems and how we can apply what we've read in books into the way that we can solve our own challenges. But I'll just say one thing that's been happening to me lately is, yes, we can listen to a lot of podcasts. Yes, we can listen to a lot of radio, watch as many YouTube videos as possible, and we can read as many books as possible. But I think as a creative, you begin to notice a trend. If you listen to the same podcaster over and over again, they are not saying anything new every time. It's almost as if they are repeating some of the things they talk about. And I noticed this when I was reading some books by people I really respect. And I tended to find that most of the stuff that was in those books was the same stuff that was in their previous books. Okay, it was just a different context of telling the same stories. So I thought, okay, so maybe I've come to a stage where the next book that I read has to be the one that I've written. The next podcast that I listen to has to be the one that I have made. The next blog post I listen to has to be the one I read, has to be the one that I've written. The next YouTube video I watch has to be the one that I have made, because I've got the tools. And so what you need to think about is, what is the ratio of your consumption to your creative genius? How much time are you dedicating to content creation versus content consumption? At some point you might be 50-50. Okay, you're consuming 50%, or 50% of time you're consuming content, and the other 50% you're creating content. I think when you get to that stage, you're almost there. But I've reached a stage where it's almost 99.999% I'm creating content, and then the other 0.1% I'm actually consuming more content. And here's the reason why I still consume some content, okay? Because there are always new ideas popping up, and you need to keep abreast of the latest trends. But also, the more you listen to other books and podcasts and YouTube videos, the less time you have for creating your own content. Because let's face it, content creators have two objectives: either to entertain you or to educate you. Okay, and sometimes they do both. So they're trying to entertain and they're trying to educate, which is a good thing. So if that is the case, then I think I've learned a lot in the past 3-4 years that is becoming saturated, and unless I start producing my own content, I will lose the ability to create my own stuff. So I need to start creating as soon as possible. And I thought now is the perfect time to do that. Okay. So all I'm doing now is trying to create content. But there are those odd times when I can neither speak nor write because of where I am. Okay, so instead of listening to something, maybe I want my mind to be clear so that I can think about what I want to do. Okay, so you need that time to think. You need that time to yourself. What you will notice now that's coming up really strongly is the notion of mindfulness and yoga and meditation, because the mind has been multitasking for a very long time, to the extent that we are not giving our minds enough time to focus on the things that affect us immediately, the things around us. So I think one of the things why it's important not to be listening to anything sometimes is so that you give yourself time to really be mindful of your surroundings and maybe to come up with your own ideas. Okay? So if you really enjoy books, you will find time to read. Once you read the first and then the second book, you will find that you want to continue reading. Okay? So the time is there, I can tell you. But for me, I'm replacing that time, which I've been using for consuming a lot of content, to creating a lot of content, because I believe that we need to create as much content as possible. And as an African, we are lagging behind in the amount of books we're writing, in the amount of the number of podcasts we're making, and in the number of movies we're making. So it's not surprising that we are being influenced by Western culture, because those are the things, that is the content which is available. That is what we are consuming. We need to start telling our own stories, and that starts with having less time for consumption and more time for content creation. So thank you for listening to this one. I will see you in the next one, because I want to make as many as possible for current and future generations.